Let me tell you a tale of the dark and twisted power of the Ouija board, a tool of the unknown that can wreak havoc on those who dare to toy with it. It was a few years ago when a group of foolish young teenagers stumbled upon the board and began toying with it without any regard for the power that it held. They made the fatal mistake of not saying goodbye, and now the consequences have caught up with them. For years, the narrator had been experiencing strange occurrences in their home, things out of place, unexplained noises, and a feeling of unease that wouldn't go away. But it was only in the past month that the activity escalated to new heights. Shadows moved across the walls, whispers echoed in empty rooms, and objects began to fly off shelves as if propelled by an unseen force. The narrator was terrified, feeling as though they were losing their mind. But then they remembered the Ouija board, and the pieces began to fall into place. This was no mere coincidence, no mere figment of their imagination. This was the work of something sinister. Desperate for a solution, the narrator turned to anyone who would listen, seeking advice on how to rid themselves of this particular curse. They knew that the only way to banish this malevolent entity was to face it head-on, and summon the courage to confront it and banish it from their life forever. But how does one go about banishing a demon from their home? There's no easy answers, no quick fixes. Some recommend seeking the help of a professional exorcist, while others suggest performing a ritual, a cleanse, to clear the space of negative energy. Whatever the solution, the narrator knows that they must act fast before this dark force consumes them entirely. They must be brave, they must be strong, and they must have faith that they can overcome this terrifying ordeal. Only then can they hope to reclaim their life and rid themselves of the haunting presence that's taken hold. The Creature. I have a story that I've never shared with anyone before, but I feel that this is probably the best place to get some insight into whatever it was that I saw. It happened back in October of 2012, when I was out hunting for a white-tailed deer with my grandfather on his property in a little run-down town called Reedy. It's located in West Virginia. It was a beautiful fall day, but despite our efforts, we weren't having any luck at the first few spots we tried. We decided to move to a different location down towards the bottom of his property. This place always gave me the creeps because everything down there seemed to be dead. The trees, the grass, there was basically never any wildlife in this area. After sitting there for about 30 or 40 minutes of seeing basically nothing, we were about to move when something caught my eye. There was this very odd-looking creature that kind of looked like a horse with a wolf face, with this very rough and decayed look on its fur and on its skin. It was just walking through the field. We were watching over it when it stepped right over the fence. Keep in mind that this fence was made to keep horses in, so this thing was quite big. At least bigger than anything that should have been in those woods. I was frozen in place trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My grandfather, who had been scanning the area with his binoculars, noticed that I was staring at something and asked me what I saw. I hesitated to say anything, as I wasn't sure if he'd believe me or not, but eventually I mustered up the courage to describe what I was seeing. To my surprise, my grandfather seemed unfazed by my description of the creature. He told me that he'd heard stories from the locals about strange sightings in the area. He even mentioned a few times when he had seen strange things himself, but he had never seen anything like this creature before. We continued to watch the creature for a few more minutes until it disappeared out of sight. We didn't speak about it much after that and continued with our hunting. However, the experience left me with an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake off. Years went by and I never told anybody about what I had seen, but the memory of that creature stayed with me, haunting me. My grandfather passed away and I became the last person to have physically seen this thing. So if any of you have any idea of what this could have been, I would be very appreciative of any insights or theories. I spent countless hours researching online trying to find anything that would match the description of what I saw, but I've come up empty-handed. It's as if this creature didn't exist or never left any trace of its existence. Nonetheless, the memory of that strange, unearthly creature still sends chills down my spine. My dad burned a Ouija board. When I was a young child of around 4 or 5, my family and I began to experience unexplained paranormal activity. At first, my parents were at a loss as to what was causing these strange occurrences, until they decided to search the house for any possible explanations. It was then that they discovered a Ouija board in the garage, which had been used for storage by the previous owner, an elderly woman. My parents, who were devout Christians, immediately decided to take action and burn the Ouija board in the backyard burn barrel. I have vague memories of the strange and unsettling events that occurred before that board was found, but what happened during the burning has stayed with me for my entire life. As my father set the board alight, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the burn barrel. I peered into the flames and saw what appeared to be a silhouette of a man, with no discernible facial features. It was a truly terrifying experience that's haunted me ever since. Despite our efforts to rid ourselves of whatever entity may have attached to our family, we've continued to experience paranormal activity off and on for the past 20 years. While I've made significant efforts to overcome my fear and anxiety surrounding these events, I can't help but feel that this entity is still attached to my family. In fact, I've not lived with my parents for years, as they refused to speak with me since I left their religion. However, I'm still searching for advice on how to detach this entity from my family once and for all. If anyone has any suggestions or guidance on how to accomplish this, I would be immensely grateful. It's difficult to describe that constant fear and anxiety that's plagued my family for so many years. Despite my best efforts to move on from this traumatic experience, I still feel a sense of dread whenever I think about the Ouija board and the entity that emerged from it. I've spoken to many people about my experiences, hoping to find some answers and understanding, but I've yet to find any concrete solutions. I'm determined to find a way to rid myself and my family of this malevolent entity once and for all, and I will not rest until I find a solution. It happened a few years ago, but this is my story. It all began with an online video that I stumbled upon while browsing the internet. It was a compilation of phone numbers that you should never call, purportedly cursed or haunted numbers that could lead to dire consequences. The video was filled with ominous warnings and hair-raising stories about people who had dared to call these numbers and suffered the consequences. Despite the warnings, I was intrigued. I've always been fascinated by the supernatural and the unexplained, and the idea of cursed phone numbers piqued my curiosity. I decided to give it a try and dialed a few of the numbers. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Heard the familiar beeps and rings, but no one answered. I assumed it was all a hoax and went to bed, thinking nothing more of it. However, that night turned out to be anything but ordinary. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud crash. It was my giant lamp next to my bed, and it had fallen to the ground, shattering into a million pieces. Glass shards littered the floor, but strangely, I felt no fear or unease. I simply shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next day, I cleaned up all the mess and tried to forget about the incident, but that night, something else happened. My parents' bedside table, a heavy piece of furniture filled with books and trinkets, suddenly flew across the room, creating a mess of epic proportions. I was terrified this time, and I couldn't explain what had caused it. Things only got stranger from there. One night while I was in the bathroom, my brother claimed to have seen me in the living room, despite the fact that I was nowhere near there. He also heard a little girl's voice, giggling and whispering, but there was no one else in the house. We were both unnerved by the experience and couldn't explain what had happened. In the days and weeks that followed, I became increasingly paranoid and fearful. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me, something malevolent and unseen. I started to see shadows moving in the corner of my eye, and I heard strange noises that I couldn't explain. I even began to experience sleep paralysis, a condition where you're conscious but unable to move, and I felt as if something was sitting on my chest, pinning me down. Eventually, the strange occurrences stopped, and life returned to normal, but the experience had left me shaken and unsure of what to believe. Was it all just a coincidence, or had I unwittingly invited something supernatural into my life? I may never know for sure, but one thing's for certain: I'll never dial a cursed phone number again. A toddler I was watching told me she couldn't sleep because of the burnt man. 10 years ago, an experience that still sends shivers down my spine occurred. I was in a romantic relationship with someone who had a child who was under 2 years old. One night while the child was away at her other parents' house, the then partner and I decided to mess with the Ouija board. At first, it seemed like harmless fun, but then things quickly turned eerie and unsettling. As we began asking questions, the board spelled out some truly chilling responses. The radio we were listening to even shut off abruptly, as if something sinister had taken over the room. We were both spooked but couldn't stop ourselves from asking more questions. The board spelled out the word like burn, pain, and hellfire, and all the responses were similarly disturbing. The spirit claimed its name was Zozo, and it seemed to revel in terrorizing us. But the real nightmares began when we picked up the child from the other parent's house. She was inconsolable and wouldn't sleep in her own room anymore. Even when we tried to comfort her by letting her sleep in our bed with us, she would cry and scream that the burning man was staring at her. She said he was too smelly and scary for her to ignore. We were completely baffled by her behavior and couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had attached itself through the Ouija board. Over time, more strange things began happening around our home. Objects would move on their own, doors would creak open and slam shut without any explanation, and we even started seeing strange shadows flitting around the edges of our vision. Our relationship began to fall apart, and the weight of the fear and paranoia that had taken over our lives. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to break the lease early and move back home. The memory of that terrifying experience still haunts me to this day, and I'll never be able to look at a Ouija board the same again. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes, when we mess with the unknown, we're inviting things into our lives that we're not prepared to face. An Irishman from the turn of the 20th century describes his personal interactions with the Fae folk. Encounters with the gentry. When I was a young man, I often used to go out into the mountains over there, pointing out in the window in their direction, to fish for trout or to hunt. And it was in January, on a cold, dry day, while carrying my gun, that I and a friend with me, we were walking around Ben Bulbin, and we saw one of the gentry for the first time. I knew who it was, for I had heard of the gentry described ever since I could remember. And this one was dressed in blue, with a headdress adorned with what seemed to be frills. When he came up to us, he said to me in a sweet and silvery voice, "The seldomer you come to this mountain, the better. A young lady here wants to take you away." Then he told us not to fire off our guns, because the gentry disliked being disturbed by the noise. And he seemed to be like a soldier of the gentry on guard, As we were leaving the mountains, he told us not to look back, and we didn't. Another time I was alone trout fishing in nearly the same region when I heard a voice say, "It is barefooted and fishing." Then there came a whistle like music, and a noise like the beating of a drum, and soon one of the gentry came and talked with me for half an hour. He said, "Your mother will die in 11 months, and do not let her die unanointed." And she did die within 11 months. And he was going away, and he warned me, "You must be in the house before sunset. Do not delay, do not delay. They can do nothing to you until I get back to the castle." As I found out afterwards, he was going to take me, but hesitated because he didn't want to leave me and my mother alone. After these warnings, I was always afraid to go to the mountains, but lately I've been told to go, if I took a friend with me. Gentry protection. The gentry have always befriended and protected me. I was drowned twice, but for them. Once I was going to the Dernish Island, a mile off the coast. The channel is very deep, and at the time there was a rough sea, with a tide running out, and I was almost lost. I shrieked and shouted and finally got safe to the mainland. The day I talked to one of the gentry at the foot of the mountain, when he was asking if he was going to take me, he mentioned this, and said they were the ones who saved me from drowning then. Gentry stations. Especially in Ireland, the gentry live inside the mountains in beautiful castles, and there are a good many branches of them in other countries as well. Like armies, they have various stations and move from one to another, so live in the Wicklow Mountains near Dublin. Gentry control over human affairs. The gentry take a great interest in the affairs of men, and they always stand for justice and the right. Any side they favor in our wars, that side wins. They favored the Boers. The Boers did get their rights. They told me they favored the Japanese and not the Russians because the Russians are tyrants. Sometimes they fight amongst themselves. One of them once said, "I'd fight for a friend, or I'd fight for Ireland." Girlfriend scared by deceased male, protected by her deceased pet cat. Me and my girlfriend, since moving in together, have had numerous encounters with the paranormal. There are, for the most part, seeing our deceased pets, hearing meows, feeling fur walk across our legs, and hearing my deceased Ihasa Apso scratching her ears. The most intense incident for me was when I was looking into the bathroom mirror and seeing my girlfriend's 3-year-old brother, who unfortunately drowned 19 years before this incident, floating right behind me, watching me from the bathroom door. I've posted stories about my meetings with her brother, about our cats and our dog, and also posted a video on a ghost subreddit, which clearly shows ghostly phenomena in our home. This is all true. I would be and was skeptical myself before these amazing incidents. On one incident, it was an early morning and we both had work that day. I woke her up and then told her I was going to the 7-Eleven and that I'd be back shortly. She tells me that she'd been showering when I'm gone and to not be alarmed if I try to call her for one reason or another, and she doesn't answer. Easy enough, right? I walk outside into the cold, dark morning air. I make it quickly to my car and sat in it while I ran the heat staring at our large 110-year-old apartment. I noticed a door open when I thought the boiler room would be. It cracked at first and then opens completely. I saw no one but figured it was a homeless person, waking up to see who was leaving the lot, but at the same time didn't want to give away his sleeping spot and was ducking behind the door as a means to stay hidden. I think nothing of it, drive to the 7-Eleven, get whatever the hell I was intending to get, and then drive home. I walk upstairs and open our door to find my girlfriend in a towel on the bed, She's visibly shaken. I immediately know something's wrong, but was quite shocked at what she told me. She was in the shower and all of a sudden the light in the room decreased, as if someone had a dimmer switch. At first she thought it was her eyes playing tricks on her, but it happened again and then again. It was as if the light bulb was being covered up, slowly blotting it out. She starts getting upset and senses a negative presence, and it's coming toward her. A split second later, our cat Echo, who at the time had been non-corporeal for 2 years, appeared in the bathroom floor. She screeched and yowled. As soon as they did this, the light immediately went back. The negative presence was gone, and she felt safe, but still very unnerved by the whole incident. Long story short, we both concluded that the dark spirit was waiting for me to leave, watching me from the door, and I thought it was just a boiler room. I didn't see anyone holding it open, because it was being done so by a ghost. The room I thought it led to also wasn't what I thought it was. It was a walled-off room with no access from the inside of the apartment. Every other time I checked that door, it was also locked. Later on in the same month, we both left early, and while standing outside before going into our car, I felt a negative force that was watching us from around the back corner of the apartment, and as soon as we both said we felt, we heard Echo yowl and scream again, this time at the same back corner of the apartment. After this, we knew that the dastardly, cowardly ghost would never be able to bother us again. Listen to a friend tell me about an experience he had 10 years ago. He died. No matter your take on it, the otherworldliness of it is quite intriguing. I've known a guy for a few years now. Let's call him Kent. He was less than an acquaintance and more of a recognized stranger. Our world would only cross when he would visit my lady's workplace. Mostly it was Kent looking for a known dope dealer that was a coworker of my girlfriend's. This guy stood out, hunched over, the wear and tear of a hard life that made a mark on him physically. Gray hair and lines, track marks on his arms, but at the same time, you could tell he was capable of doing things that most of us would or couldn't do, and would do these things to survive if need be. I would see him walking the streets, backpacks with tools of some kind or another, and he was always alone for the most part. People sensing him coming their way, and almost making an unconscious parting of the waves, almost like he was repelling them. A force he had in him, definitely, but was not aware of having, let alone having any type of control over it. Let's fast forward to a few months back. I was on unemployment, and as we all know, unemployment barely pays the bills. My mindset became one of quick money, work with payment under the table and the like. He enters my girlfriend's workplace, and he seems upset. I eavesdrop and learn that he has some copper and brass and needed to ride to a scrapper. No one was able to help him, and if he could find a driver, he'd pay them $25 simply for driving him. I told him that I would talk, and it was awkward at first, but we soon sorted out the dry spots of our conversation, and he seemed to have worked up a camaraderie. I of course tell him that myself, that I'll be able to help him, occasionally, and that he is to know nothing about me, where my lady and I stay, etc. Of course, this all went to pot rather quickly, and I started driving him daily to the scrapyard, making it $20 to $40 in the time it takes to literally drive 5 miles. He tells me some things about himself, things at first he wasn't wanting to share, but for some reason his trust in me grew with each trip, and I learned a little more each day. Lifer Khan, and out since the early 80s, an associate of one of the Aryan gangs, and at times did some rough stuff to survive in prison, and out on the streets, usually in the services of said gang. Today we started talking about paranormal experiences. I told him mine about my corporeal feline, Echo, who left his physical body in October in 2017, but as far as me, my lady cat Endiku, and my Echo, nothing's changed. The cat is here daily, meows, jumps on the bed. We've seen regular sized and about 2 inches tall. I've seen him fly too. I've seen him run like he did when he was joined in his physical body. I also opened up to seeing my girlfriend, 2 years older brother, staring at me from the living room while I was in the bathroom. Her brother drowned 17 or 18 years ago, but he was saying hello to me and checking on his sis. I've posted many stories about my cat Echo and the story of my brother on Reddit. He at first seems to think I'm bullshitting him or making fun of him in some way. I then show Kent a video and I have my cat Echo running through a refrigerator at me. He watches and he's impressed. And then I show him a few more photos and videos of my Echo flying and running through the house as a shimmering gold-colored version of himself. He then opens up to me about one of his experiences. I was expecting prison ghost story or something like that, but I got something completely different. He at first just kept saying otherworldly, and I was confused thinking aliens, but I was still not on the right path. He slowly tells me that when he lived in Nebraska a decade or so ago, he died, and he had a rather frightening experience. He had just shot some new heroin, and now he wasn't yet familiar with, and he dropped off into death. I asked, "Did he know that you were dead?" And he said, "Yeah." I was aware of it all, my body on the ground, the needle in my arm, and the fact that I was floating away with no control as to where I was going. He said he then encountered a neutral type being, not bad or good, just there. A psychopomp. He didn't use these words, but I'm guessing that's what many of us would have categorized it as. It was leading him to what he called a waiting room. He was aware of others in the room, but didn't know of any of these, and I'm assuming newly dead people. He heard a voice far off tell him it wasn't yet his time to die and be judged. He stated that as soon as he had heard these words, it led him to a far-off place separate from the waiting room. He said it was best described as hell. Flames everywhere, liquid fire. It was emanating from the walls and the floor and the sky. He said that it reeked of shit and piss, and there were half-eaten beings eating and eating each other, and animal beasts and huge sex organs, and black voidless faces, and screaming and yelling and cursing. Everything that he had ever lived. He then looked out in the fire and at the moment confessed to me that he had killed 3 people. The 3 were witness to the psychopomp, and the fact that Kent was behind the messenger and out of harm's way. 2 of them begged and pleaded that this neutral spirit, begged that the spirit would give them Kent, toss Kent into this horrible conflagration of man, woman, beast, demon. They cursed and hated the man and God, and said the only thing they wanted was Kent, the person that killed them, the one they blamed for putting them into this place. The side chomp stood mute and simply let Kent observe this place. Then the 3rd man spoke and pleaded that this guiding spirit take Kent away, far away from this place. He told Kent that he forgave him and that he loved him, and that he could prevent even one soul from the torment that he was in, that he would have done at least one good thing in that terrible life that he had led. He also told Kent that he may have killed him, but that he wasn't to blame for him being damned. It was he who, step by step, with the conscious mind, put himself in this place, and he alone. After that, Kent described a rushing sound, and he and the guide were going really quickly back to where his body lay. The guide, who was mute, spoke and told him that the 2 had once again failed at a chance at redemption, but one had passed. He then woke up to paramedics hitting him, and tubes and wires along with vomit everywhere. He had been dead for 20 minutes, but according to him, he felt like he had been dead in the waiting room, and that's the best way that he had described it. It was like hell for weeks. After that, he changed the subject, and I wasn't one to pry. I dropped him off, and have been playing this tale out in my head over and over again. A question for a certain type of person. The phenomenon of disbelief in the paranormal, even after experiencing something inexplicable, is a complex and an intriguing one. It raises questions about the nature of belief, skepticism, and the human's mind and the ability to comprehend the unknown. For some, disbelief in the paranormal may stem from a desire to maintain a sense of control and rationality in their views. Admitting the existence of paranormal phenomena could shatter their carefully constructed worldview and leave them feeling vulnerable and unsure. Others may simply be unwilling to accept anything that cannot be easily explained by science or rational thought. However, it's important to remember that everyone's experiences and perspectives are different. What may seem like an undeniable paranormal encounter to one person may be easily dismissed by another. Additionally, people may change their beliefs over time, and they gain more information or have new experiences. It's also worth noting that some people may claim to disbelieve in the paranormal as a way to avoid ridicule or judgment from others. The fear of being labeled a gullible or irrational can be a powerful motivator to deny experiences that don't fit into mainstream beliefs. Regardless of the reasons behind disbelief, it's important to approach the paranormal with an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism. While it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a mysterious encounter, it's crucial to consider all possibilities and all explanations and not just jump to conclusions. Ultimately, the paranormal remains a fascinating and enigmatic subject, one that will continue to captivate and confound us for years to come. And while we may never fully understand the mysteries of the unknown, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding remains a worthy endeavor. Caught a ghost child spying on me. It was a weeknight and late. My fiancé had been snoozing for quite a while, along with their Maine Coon cat and Deku. I could hear their rhythmic breathing, their peaceful sounds slowly beckoning me to bed. I had been up and wired from work, and I had wind down from the workday. I was in the bathroom, pimping and preening, facing the mirror with my back to the door and listening to one of the YouTube channels that specializes in true horror, camper stories, stuff like that. The door props slightly open, and I think it's the cat wanting to play or be brushed. But as I'm looking into the mirror to see what it is, it's now slightly opening the door, and I'm confused. No cat, no girlfriend, but what I do see scared the shit out of me, because it was jarring and unexpected. From my point of view, looking into the mirror, I see a well-formed child's face peek its head in the crack and look at me. It's gray and whitish and bluish as well, but it's clearly a child's face and head. The face is so small and the eyes have an almost East Asian quality to them. He's looking at me from the top corner, where the door is and the wall would meet. There's no body, just a small child's head. He, within a few seconds, realizes that I can see him, and just as quickly disappears. He pulls his head back around the corner. It was just like something a little living kid would do, if they realized they were being caught spying on an adult. My mind questions what I saw, and I run out of the bathroom to see if he's still there or my girlfriend was awake to see him as well. There's nothing in the room, or at least visible to my naked eye. I look at my lady. She's oblivious to all this and still sound asleep. My cat's now staring, but as far as the little ghost boys go, nothing. I go into bed on edge, but at the same time, I didn't feel threatened at all by the child. In the morning, my fiancé and I discuss what happened, and at first she tells me that I was tired or saw shadows. I describe the child, and I'm adamant that this happened. Her guess is that it's her deceased brother who had physically passed at 2 years old in the year 2001. She shows me a photo and the face is a perfect match. Her mother, after leaving her father, married a Filipino man, and the little boy was a product of their marriage. Same hair, same face shape, same eyes. I have more visits from him as well, but we'll describe those in detail at a later date. Haunted campgrounds make for interesting summer vacations. Hey guys, putting it all out on the table. I'm brand new to Reddit, but I'd love some insight on this collection of stories I have from my time working at this summer camp. Hello to all, and I hope this post finds you well. And before anyone comments on it, yes, I'm aware that this post is very, very lengthy. It was difficult to condense, since there's so much to cover and the stories require a fair bit of context. I'll start out by giving you some background info on where all this takes place. This collection of stories is a bit lengthy, so I do apologize in advance. I'll try to stay brief, but the premise is quite important, so I might as well get to the tedious details out of the way first. I worked at and lived near a summer camp in the northeastern United States that run from late June to early August every summer. The main attraction of the camp is that it's an overnight camp. Staff and campers arrive on Sunday afternoon and leave Friday evening each week during the camp season, while living isolated in the camp during the week. The camp has many, many cabins used for sleeping, a huge mess hall for meals, and about 10 other buildings ranging from large, single-story centers to small supply sheds. The entire camp property stretches from acres and acres, and it's incredibly beautiful in that lush, cool forest greenway that the Northeast has in the summer. There's everything from big open fields and forests to large ponds full of fish and long, long stretches of beautiful ravine with lots of exposed shale and wildlife. It is set a good distance off any main road, and you have to travel up a long driveway to get into the camp. The entire property feels like its own isolated universe. Campers are not allowed to have electronics. Staff can in the evenings and on break. No computers, no cars, and little communication with the outside world, apart from what's required from the camp directors. When needed, staff can carry walkie-talkies to keep in touch across the expanse of the camp. I went there as a child for 10 years and worked there for 4 years, and it's safe to say I have a whole lot of love for that place. But to anyone who has worked there, you would know that that place has long, very complex history with the paranormal. I could write a full-length book with all the stories I've heard and have personally experienced there over many, many summers. I'd like to give a good overview of what the place is like as a staff member and share a couple of more chilling encounters I've had. Many still give me shivers to this day, even though I've been somewhat desensitized to them for a while now. Most of these encounters I'm going to share with you happened between 2014 and 18. While I was training to work as a counselor, I was between 16 and 20 at the time. Most of the activity would happen at night, during training week, and just generally around the staff at camp. Rarely did the campers ever come in contact with the entities that lurked within the woods there. Why that is, I honestly can't tell you. My memories there as a young girl contain not even a trace of fright or things I could explain. In contrast to that, the experience I had there as a young adult had me nearly in tears. Consistently, there were things that would happen each year without fail. To start, during the training week after the kids had gone to bed, many of us counselors would lay out under the stars outside the mess hall to unwind for the day. It had a beautiful, clear view of the constellations over the head of the rec field and onto the hills beyond. Many nights we would see quick, blinking lights moving in erratic patterns, odd meteor showers when there was none predicted in the area, and often see strange red flickering objects deep out in the night sky. And no, they weren't planets, as they would often be in the wrong place in the sky and only stick around one evening out of the week. I had a few friends over there who had a good understanding of our solar system, I spent many nights looking at their utterly baffled faces as they looked up at some oddity that had appeared, exclaiming that what we were seeing was just simply impossible, despite 10+ witnesses of it happening. Counselors often can't go an entire summer without experiencing nightmares, many of which include figures standing in the corners of their cabins or at the foot of their bunks. I've had these nightmares every year except my first year working there. I would wake in a cold sweat to a quiet cabin, and the kids resting peacefully nearby. Screams and voices in the night carried into camp off the wind from the pond. Footsteps pacing around buildings only for there to be no one out of the bed. The items disappearing and reappearing in illogical places were all incredibly common. Doors with heavy padlocks would be found open with no one to blame. Occasionally, a counselor would get locked into a building they were working in, despite no one being around to lock the door. People would walk into this job being completely skeptic and leave believers. Returning staff had to make peace with the things within the camp and just had to deal with it and give fair warning to newcomers about the mysteries that seemed to live in the very floorboards of that camp. My first memory of there being anything paranormal within the camp was in 2014, while I was training for my first year as a camp counselor. I remember that all throughout my childhood, there had been a singular flat tombstone that lay on the hill leading down to the camp's pool. It sat right outside the girls' village, the term used for all the cabins where the female campers and the counselors slept. It was incredibly old, so old that the name and dates were unreadable. But the way that the text was formatted made it obvious that it was someone's grave. No one could really give a good explanation as to why it was there. Everyone I asked about it simply told me it had been there for a long time before them. My first year there, I remember there being lots of drama concerning the paranormal, but I was too young and not close enough with the older counselors for any of them to share what was going on. But by the end of the year, the tombstone had been removed, and no one was allowed to talk about it or mention it to any of the campers. I remember thinking to myself that even though the tombstone was gone, someone still lay buried on that hill, no matter how long ago they had been laid to rest. Maybe the camp directors thought that maybe by getting rid of it, they would bring an end to the paranormal activity. Unfortunately, they were wrong. Alongside the mysterious tombstone, many stories rotated through the co-counselor's friends. And as I, the newest staff member, the first story I ever told about the camp happened during a training weekend in June of 2014. My friends and I had gotten into the topic of scary stories, and the older counselors jumped in to have a little fun with us. Side note, counselors at this camp were given counselor names in our first year, and we strictly used those names during the summer to add a little extra fun in the camp. For story's purpose, I'm going to refer to all the people in these stories by their camp names. An older counselor named Gadget was the first to pipe up, telling us about the two famous ghosts at the camp. He told us about the ghost of a boy who could be seen running through the rec field in the streetlights from the dead-end road that ran along the edge of camp. Gadget told us that he had been hit by a car after running after a ball, and now spent his afterlife running as a shadow through the camp, scaring everyone who's awake to see him. The second story was that of a woman in white. Under the same streetlight that lit the dead-end road that bordered the camp, a few small houses sat. On some nights, a woman wearing long flowing white dress could be seen standing at one end of the deck porch. She would spend nights standing and staring up at the camp and be gone by sunrise. My fellow first-year counselors and I were, of course, quite scared by this point. It was far past midnight, and we were gathered under the floodlights of a brightly lit pavilion near the rec field and at the dead-end road. They had scared us by the end of the storytelling. Luckily, another one of the older counselors, someone who had come to be one of my dearest friends during my time there, called Slag, simply shook his head and furrowed eyebrows as he watched the older counselors spook us. Later that evening, Slag took me up to the top of the hill that overlooked the rec field and the dead-end road. He could tell how scared I was at the rumors, but from the vantage point, he explained and showed me that Gadget and his friends and what they were talking about. Down on the rec field, the streetlights caused long, slanting shadows to fall in a sickly yellow fashion onto the grass. On one of the light poles, there is an electrical box, and the way the shadow fell onto the grass made a perfect image of a small child caught mid-step. When I saw it, it made me jump at how realistic it looked. It was no wonder it became popular, as it truly could be mistaken for an actual apparition. Slag also pointed out to me that the woman in white, again, I didn't see her at first, but Slag's description helped. The woman in white was simply an oversized American flag that hung on one of the house's porch. That evening was clear and breezy, the moonlight caused by the flag to look milky white, and the wind made a dance slowly around the flagpole, just as the dress of an actual woman would float in the breeze. I started to laugh in relief, but Slag's face stayed serious. He went on to explain to me that even though these were merely scary coincidences, we weren't alone here. He explains to me that some of what I shared with him were what he shared with me, and it made me turn serious as well. That night, my friend and I huddled into the same bunk out of newborn fear. We didn't realize it was the beginning of a long road of stories on our own. One of the places in camp that granted me the most unnerving experiences was a building we referred to as day camp. We had a program where we would bus in the youngest age group of campers. They would have their own day camp activities before returning home around 4 p.m. The building was the only two-story building on the property and used to be a house before the camp was built in 1925. The main space was big, beautiful windows that let the sunset in. The kitchen worked, but it was a little run down. The upstairs was large and an attic-like room that served as a space to use for activities on the day it rained. Day camp was easily the farthest building from all others. You'd walk through a stretch of woods on a small rocky trail to get there, and oftentimes you couldn't even hear the sounds of other people from the building, and that's saying a lot as there's easily 300 loud hyper kids and preteens there each week. Day camp never felt right to me. The feel of the building gave me the Blair Witch Project vibe, something I didn't feel many other places on the camp. I tried to never go there alone, though I did need to close the building by myself occasionally. My body would tense up, and I felt as if something physically pressed down on my skin anytime I would walk through there. Every time I turned my back on an empty room, I felt as if an entire crowd of silent, watchful people stared through me. The boys' village was the nearest cluster of buildings to day camp. Unless day camp was being used in the evening by someone and the lights were on, it was nearly impossible to see the building with the blind eye. The dark brown wood blended into the expanse of woods that hid it from the rest of the camp. Day camp always got closed around 4 p.m., after the day campers returned home. All the rooms were checked, lights turned off, padlocked back in place, and locked until the next morning. My male counselor friends shared with me that every summer, once or twice a week, once the kids had gone to bed and the boys sat outside talking, someone would notice a light on in the day camp. And this wasn't simply someone leaving the light on from the day. Sometimes the same counselor who had closed the day camp earlier in the day would see the lights on downstairs, glowing in solidarity through the dark woods. On these nights, the boy would take turns, walking down the dark path and back to get to the light, returning shivering and swearing that they'll never do that again. My personal experience with day camp came during the summer of 2016. Every summer, the camp performs something called a missing camper drill. This simply prepares counselors for the event that a scared child would run away. Staff could react quickly and locate and calm them. The drill was on a good day, and it was already something that's taken incredibly seriously by all staff. The missing camper is a randomly chosen counselor each training week, and all the other counselors have to go through the procedure of tracking the child down. To do this, the camp is split into sections, and the eldest staff takes walkie-talkies, divide up the areas, and sprint around the camp looking for the missing camper, shouting their name, looking under and around structures in the camp, and checking any locked buildings. The camp director will go around the drill and do things to throw off the searching counselors too. They'll unlock doors, lock others, move things around, just to get everyone in the mindset of the actual drill. Of course, the area was given to search alone, may I add, was day camp. As I ran through the woods and toward the looming house, I felt a huge sense of dread fall over me. I seriously considered not searching it at all and just telling the other staff that I did. With shaking hands, I unlocked the day camp door and walked around inside, calling the name of the girl who was the missing child. The floorboards creaked, and I remember how incredibly silent the whole house felt, apart from my movements. The sun was setting at the time, and creamy orange light fell through the length of the building from the windows. It was so unnatural compared to the busier part of the camp. I couldn't hear the other counselors searching, not even when I strained my ears. Every room and corner I checked, I braced myself to come face to face with the spirits I saw in the nightmares, the ones I've heard crouching over gravel in the middle of the night, the ones who speak softly in the dark and make even grown men run back to their bunks unnerved. The building was clear. I sighed in relief as I locked the door firmly behind me and headed back outside. The air had begun to get chilly, and I hoped the drill would be over soon. Searching in the dark would be nearly impossible, and I knew that Swift, my friend acting as the missing kid, had no desire to creep around the camp in the dark either. As I walked past the external cellar doors that led under day camp, I gave them a good shake to check the padlock on them. Locked. This was a location I was previously told I didn't need to open or check for this drill anyway. I went on and searched the woods surrounding the building and I found nothing. I reported on my walkie and I was told to keep double checking the area until Swift was found. Then the drill ended. I started walking back, slower this time as I felt fairly positive Swift was over half a mile away at the other side of the camp. As day camp came back into sight through the trees, I froze in confusion and fear. The cellar doors of the day camp cellar were both flung open, and a yellowish light shone from inside. It was just becoming dark enough that the light spilled out and illuminated the space around it, while the shadows of its surroundings only pushed in darker. Never in my previous 3 years working in that camp did I ever know those doors even opened. Never did I know that there was even a key for that padlock, nor did I know that there was a working light down there. I was completely stunned. Shivers ran through me. Certainly not from the evening chill. Swift, I called. Not in the way I would call to a camper, but as I would call her normally. Nothing moved, nothing made a noise. The fear felt cold and numbing in my veins. I crept to the top of the cellar stairs and peered down. The space was lit by a single exposed light bulb, showing me 6 or 7 rotting wooden steps and cold-looking stone walls, all broken with age. The floor was dirt, and there were no objects inside the cellar. The sound of my radio going off that Swift had been found nearly made me jump out of my skin. I fell backwards onto my butt in the grass, and spent another second staring at the bizarre scene in front of me. I scrambled up, back toward the rest of the camp as quickly as possible. To my surprise, I arrived back. My friend Amino also appeared visibly shaken and talking quickly. She was telling us that during the drill she was walking by one of the maintenance sheds of the camp, another location with a padlocked door that we weren't including in the drill. To her surprise, the door started shaking violently against its padlock, much more than any wind or draft could do. Amino fully believed the Swift was trapped, and it was part of the scenario, and they quickly found another friend and got the key to open the shed. As they swung it open, they found no one. In fact, the maintenance man Sparrow hadn't even been to camp that day, so there's no way anyone or anything could have gotten trapped back there. She was so shaken up she could barely get her story out. I also told everyone what I had encountered. Everyone looked at us jarred by our stories, but none were surprised. Did anyone open the doors to the day camp cellars as part of the drill? I asked to some of the senior staff members. They shook their heads. Swift wasn't located near either of those spots anyways. She was hiding up past the pond. Wonder our program director said that. Swift's hiding spot was nearly as far away as day camp was from the rest of camp, but on the complete opposite side of the property. Everyone was shocked, but there was nothing to be done. The camp directors and senior staff could do little to comfort us, but they knew it too. We simply weren't alone. Later that night, my friend Tanter and I returned from day camp to close the cellar and put the padlock back in its place. It hasn't gone open for any season since then. Day camp continued to be my weakness as I went into my 4th year. As a program specialist in 2017, that year during our program I ran, my group of campers chose day camp as our meeting place. I was reluctant at first, but this time I had my friend Ouija with me as my co-counselor. He's someone who I would trust in the Paris catacombs. He was and is incredibly in tune with the paranormal world and is very knowledgeable on how to communicate with it properly and in a way that they listen. He explained to me that my hunches about day camp were true, and that there were most likely no places in camp that didn't attract spirits in some form or another. I made sure to always have him nearby inside day camp. By the end of summer, I could always relax in there. It was as if whatever dwelled there graciously took an eye off me and let me rest. I realize how long this collection of stories has gone on. In truth, this isn't even half of what I've seen or heard about from people I trust, but I'll leave it here for now. Fortunate for myself and anyone who worked at the camp, whatever spirit shared that space don't seek to physically harm anyone, but they do like to be seen and talked about, remembered through stories. They enjoy adding their own mystery to the camp. I truly believe they wish to remain a part of that camp's identity. It's a place with so much history. My grandfather went to the same camp as a child himself, and so much energy inhabits the place. I think they can't help but want to join in. The deep green woods, the aging structures, the ruins and secrets and stories that camp hold are their home, and anyone who treads there comes to learn and respect that. Even though I've made peace with my experiences at this camp, and I'm not even applying the work there this summer, I've always felt that camps like this one have their fair share of stories. If there's anyone around who's had something similar happen to them at the summer camp, I'd really love to hear about it. Encountered ghost of horse walking through busy street in the middle of a medium-sized city. It was a chilly evening in December, and I was leaving work after a long day. The sky was getting dark, and it was still slightly overcast. A typical workday for the most part. I was eager to get home, curl up with a good book, and forget about the stresses of the day. As I drove through the main road of the city, I noticed that the traffic was still a little congested due to the remnants of rush hour. I sighed, resigned to the fact that I'd have to endure a bit more of a commute before I could finally relax. But then something caught my eye. At first I thought it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but as I got closer, I realized that I was looking at a pair of horse legs. They weren't solid, but they were definitely horse legs, and I could see them clearly in the light of my headlights. As I watched in amazement, the rest of the horse's body materialized before my eyes. It was a beautiful animal with a shiny coat and a proud stance. I could see its head, its mane blowing in the wind, and its eyes seemed to look straight through me. It was a breathtaking sight, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The horse walked slowly across the street, taking its time, as it had all the time in the world. It lasted about 30 seconds and then disappeared into a large field. I sat there for a moment, stunned, trying to process what I had just witnessed. It was obvious to me that it was a spirit of a deceased horse, and I was baffled as to why it was there. I decided to do some research and found out more about the area where I had seen the ghost horse. To my surprise, I discovered that until the 1930s, the whole area was a working farm. It seemed that the horse had decided to stick around its old stomping grounds and continue with its normal way of life, walking the same pasture and the roads that he always did. I drove by the area many more times, hoping to catch another glimpse of my non-corporeal friend, but I never saw him again. Hopefully the memory of that magical evening stays with me, and I often think about the beautiful ghost horse that I had the privilege of seeing. It made me wonder what other secrets and mysteries this world holds, just waiting to be discovered. I invited an entity into my home as a teenager. As a teenager, I was a kung fu enthusiast. I was in a class, read books, studied diagrams and theories, and this obsession led me to Buddhism, and then specifically Tibetan Buddhism. Fast forward a few months and I'm deep into it, and the Tibetan culture as a whole. I read various writings, meditated several times a day, and attempted to follow the path of the Bodhisattva. I ate up whatever knowledge was available but needed more. The way I went about attempting to gain said knowledge was naive and spiritually dangerous. I would stay up at night alone meditating, and after meditation, I would ask for guidance from any spirit entity that could show me more regarding Buddhism, reincarnation, karma, and anything that fell into those categories. I would then focus on a candle in my house. The room I was in was the living room, and it was dim but not dark, and I would find myself getting drowsy as the minutes ticked on, and bored and more moving on to something else. I went on for days like this until one summer, late night, early morning, a bright orb appeared in the room, hovering and moving about. At first I thought I was seeing things, but then as if to show me that it was real, went toward the door and made the doorknob move. It wasn't subtle. It was as if someone was trying to get into the house with a locked door. Instead of me sitting there trying to ask questions or see what the ball of energy had to offer, I ran into my room and I was afraid. It was comical really, but at the same time it scared me. I'd like to add that it wasn't threatening me or giving off anything negative. I was just simply afraid because it was there in my presence. Days later, my mom tells me a few nights earlier, while she was getting up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, she witnessed a male ghost standing over me while I was asleep on the couch in the living room. She sat in her bedroom doorway, afraid, and kept silent. He was, as she described, opaque, wearing a robe of some kind, and a fisherman's rain cap. Apparently the cap looked like the one in part of the logo for what I believe is Gordon's Seafood. He simply stood there looking down at me and then vanished. I had not told her about any of my prior explorations, nor about the orb or the doorknob. After this, I had no other visits from the orb or the fisherman, as far as I know, I should say.